Thank y'all for having me this morning. I really appreciate it. The thing I enjoy most about being able to come and talk to this group is because this is one of the groups where I feel least crazy when speaking, because sometimes I feel like that meme reference where you see, Charlie pointing at the wall and all the red strings connected and all the conspiracies lining up together. A lot of times that's what I feel like, especially when I'm starting to talk about critical infrastructure impacts and trying to articulate to people just how civilization focused our work really is, and that's why I appreciate you all taking the time to come together today. I appreciate all the folks with ICS Village and bringing together this group and our friends that do all of this hard work in the backgrounds throughout the year to be able to have a focused conversation like this. And I know it's a significant investment in y'all's time to be able to come here, but it really is all about our special responsibility that we have to each other, to our neighbors at the end of the day. And that's the kind of framing that I use for our folks, for my friends at CISA when we're talking about the importance of our mission. It's an analogy I've used a couple of times recently. We've all eaten of the apple of critical infrastructure cybersecurity knowledge. We all have the guilty knowledge of, what is the potential worst that could happen? What are the effects that we could see that, could be generated? Everybody in this room knows exactly what our adversaries are doing day in and day out. We know that they are pre-positioning within our critical infrastructure. We know what they are doing to make moves against the American people and to hold our infrastructure at risk, to take advantage of it at a time and place they're choosing. Therefore, we all have a special responsibility then to be able to protect our friends and family and our neighbors. We have to be comfortable with making eye contact with our loved ones in the event that something truly tragic happens over the next couple of years and saying, with full trust in our hearts, yeah, we absolutely did everything we could to prevent this. Yes, we as manufacturers and as OEMs made the changes that we needed to. Yes, we as integrators and the people that are helping these plants to come online and helping them to go through refreshes. Yes, we absolutely did the things that we needed to follow the right types of guidance to implement things securely as we did builds. And yes, we as operators continue to follow the guidance that we needed to most securely operate. Otherwise, every single one of us is going to have a moment in the near future where we're going to realize what it felt like to be a TSA employee on September 12th. That's the kind of framing that I use with my CISA team. Is we need to be able to have that level of comfort, that level of confidence that we are doing absolutely everything in our power to protect our families and protect our neighbors, because at the end of the day, this is a people problem and this is a preservation of our civilization and preservation of our way of life problem. So at CISA, we really have tried to refocus our efforts and just understanding that we're not going to be able to tackle all problems everywhere all the time. So for those of you that are policy nerds or just like trolling, the CISA.gov website for the latest in great reading to keep you busy at night, you'll know that we just published our new binding operational directive last week. And at its core, forget all the technical measures about the tables and the where do we get to. At its core, it's about prioritization of what is most critical. Whether it's vulnerability management and a new BOD and us looking at, is this something that's actively being exploited? Is it something that's internet accessible? Is it something that can be automatable in its exploitation, by the adversary? Take all that off the table. It's about prioritizing what's most important. It's prioritizing what is going to have the most consequence for us if we see those exploitations. So for us, with our critical infrastructure focused work over the course of the last year or so since I've been there, we've tried to take the same approach. What is absolutely most consequential for us to focus on? And for us, that has meant what's most consequential for the purposes of public health and safety, of continuity of our economy, of defense critical infrastructure, and our overall national security. Again, understanding that we just can't be everywhere all the time. None of us can be. None of us can remediate every single vulnerability. None of us in the age of, AI accelerated weaponization and exploitation paths are going to be able to secure everything. None of us are going to be able to account for every single adversarial interaction or every sort of novel technique that an adversary is going to come up with in the space. we're going to have to ruthlessly prioritize what is it that is most significant, what is it that is most important today. I think that that's true whether we're looking at CISA and its federal mission within the .gov infrastructure. It's us whether we're looking at our investments on what is CDM in the future going to look like. It's us when we're talking about the operational technology landscape. It's us when we're talking about workforce investments, because none of us are ever going to be able to hire as many people as we need to. But being able to prepare for that bad day means that we have to be as unified as possible. So I saw, my friend Craig from the, Maryland's, National Guard here a few minutes ago. I don't know where he is, but I know he's coming up here with y'all in just a little bit. So we're talking about National Guard partnerships. I know the state of New York's here in the house as well here. To be able to talk about state partnerships. We've got our federal friends that are here. We've got our industry friends that are here. And it's going to take an entire ecosystem focused approach for us to be able to tackle this, because none of us own the entirety of the threat landscape. None of us own all the keys to mitigation, and none of us owns enough resources to be able to fully mitigate this. So, Matt's here, and he's going to answer all of your hard questions later, every last one of them later on today when we start talking about things like CI Fortify. But at the end of the day, that's what that's about. It's about how do we become more resilient? How do we become more easily recoverable? How do we operate in isolation? And how do we start to just wake up to the fact that we are going to see an adversarial disruption of our critical infrastructure? It is going to happen. Each and every one of us is operating right now on the front lines of a war that is never going to be declared. Our adversaries continuing to make moves within critical infrastructure. They're continuing to gain expertise. They're continuing to use new techniques and new technology to be able to accelerate their advantage within this space. We are going to see civilian disruptions to infrastructure. It's going to have a significant, not just technical impact, it's going to have a significant psychological impact on the safety of the American people and their trust that they're going to be able to count on the lights to come on every single time they need them to, on medical facilities to be available when they need them to, on transportation facilities to be available when they need them to. And we need to start operating like that's the reality of where we're at, that we're not going to be able to keep everything persistently online and available as much as we would like. So we have to start making some assumptions like telecommunications infrastructure may be disrupted. Why? Because the telecommunications infrastructure is going to be disrupted. I feel like we've sort of buried our heads in the sands, maybe not so much in this community, but in others, to operate with the assumption that we can be absolutely 100% resilient 100% of the time. And that 100% resilient metric for a lot of people, I think, means absolutely zero disruption whatsoever, which I know is somewhat going against the theme of being undisruptible. But at some point, being undisruptible means that persistent availability of services when we need it, where we need it. It does not necessarily mean that everything is going to be available 100% of the time. I feel like it's a lot easier for us to wrap our minds around this when it's a physical incident, when it's a natural disaster, when it's a hurricane that hits us, and we naturally, become a little bit more lenient with saying, yeah, I know it's going to take a little while. We're going to have to send out road crews to be able to do what they need to do to clear the roads. We're going to have to send out linemen to do the hard work of restoring the lines. We're going to have to send people out with water bottles, and cargo pallets to be able to distribute water in the meantime. We're not going to have that same level of kindness and understanding from the public and from our neighbors when it comes to a cyber incident. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to look at us and go, I don't understand. Can't you just turn it off and turn it back on again and fix this problem? Or you're saying this computer was bricked, whatever that means. Can't you just swap this thing out again? And the answer is going to be no. And we're going to need to have some time to be able to think about in a really, really significant way, what does that long-term resilience mean? What does our long-term posture mean in this space? And how do we make those trade-offs in a way that is safe? And how do we make those trade-offs in a way that is going to have the least amount of negative impact on people overall? Continuity of the economy, which I know are the cardinal of continuity of the economy, Mark is coming to talk to y'all as well. And he'll be much more articulate in this than I will. But continuity of the economy for us, I think we have to wrap our minds around. It might be okay for us to have a local bank branch that's down for a couple of weeks at a time, to be able to say that maybe a couple of these ATMs aren't available, to be able to say, no, I can't log on to my bank's website right now, but you know what? The bulk payment processing system is going to be secure. The bond auction system is going to continue to operate. the things that are the core and critical underpinnings of our economy, and being able to make sure that people are going to be able to count on the fact that their money is still going to be there, and we're not going to see a significant economic impact, that those are the things that are most important for us overall. And we're going to have to operate in that trade space in a really significant way for a potentially undetermined amount of time. So don't ask me any questions about CI Fortify, because Matt's going to be here and he's going to be able to tell you all the things. But at its core, that sort of sad but realistic feeling of how do we operate in isolation, and how do we be able to get to recovery, and how do we fight through the consequences that we're going to experience is really what this is all about. And that's sort of a refocus for all of us as we continue to make these pivots within CISA and within the rest of the interagency. So I'm going to pause there, and I know that we're going to have some time for questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to drag you all down into the abyss of sadness that is resilience and trade-offs and our obligation to our neighbors. But I can't thank you all enough for taking the time. I can't thank you all enough just looking around the room and seeing how many fantastic partners that we have here, across the federal space, the state and local space, our industry partners. I'm not going to use the team sport trope because it drives me insane. But this sort of community reinforcement of expectations is incredibly important for us. There are a lot of times where we go through cycles of are these same couple of people from the federal government just going to keep telling me about how sad my life potentially could be, and about how we need to make investments in resilient infrastructure. But you all continuing to echo that message, you all continuing to support that, you all continuing to engage as partners, and you holding us accountable for delivering where we're not delivering, and you holding us to account where we're not pushing as hard or as fast as we need to, is exceedingly important for a strong and healthy CISA over the long term, and for a strong and healthy federal cyber ecosystem. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Saw you first.
Thank you so much, Josh. Sir, there are 420 entities on the voluntary program, and I think we need to grow that. However, I guess my question is, how many, are there any efforts established to change that from voluntary to you have to do this?
There's 420 entities with the what program?
Water plants in the Water Rights Act.
Yeah. So water and wastewater, that's a real mess of a sector for us. There's no other sector that I think I can point to. And I know that this is the room absolutely where somebody will raise their hand and correct me. But in my mind, water and wastewater, there's no other sector where it is so exceedingly localized everywhere. That is an incredibly hard problem for us to get behind. So I don't know yet that we will see a moment where we start to move from the voluntary to the mandatory. Where I think that we're going to see more efforts is, CIRCIA is any day now. CIRCIA is going to become a real thing. We're going to finish up our town halls this week. We're going to finish up, the ex parte comms process. We're going to get through the final rulemaking. Then we're going to start to see some of that shift into, mandated reporting. So I think that's a start. The bigger part for me is, how do we apply things like state and local grant dollars in the smartest way possible? So state and local cyber grant program is another element. Both the authority and the budget expires at the end of this fiscal year for CISA. So we're hopeful to continue to be able to work with our friends in Congress to be able to see that authority extended. So in my mind, right now, it's a little less, how do we go and start making things mandatory on a sector that, just to be honest, doesn't have the resources to be able to adapt to all these changing norms that we see within the operating environment, and more about how do we identify the entities in a prioritized way that we need to start doing that outreach to, and in a very deliberate way, making sure they've got the resources to help better secure themselves and to better educate themselves. In particular, where we start to see things like, this is going to stray a little bit out of the water sector, so I apologize. But if we see things like, whether it's like an electric entity a co-op maybe that's providing, the power for a military installation. We can sit here and tell them all day long, you need to make yourself more secure. Here's a target. Why don't you hit this resilience target? That's great. But unless I expect community, where a significant amount of them, especially in our more rural communities where we start to see a lot of our military installations, maybe on a fixed income, whether it's a military retirement because they stuck around in the area or they're living off Social Security or whatever it might be, to pay triple the electric bill because we're passing the entire burden along to them of underwriting national security. It's really about taking advantage of things like these state and local cyber grant programs to be able to make sure they've got the right level of resources to help secure themselves, to hit that higher standard and that higher burden that we're foisting upon them. I know that didn't quite answer your question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Nick. It can't be easy being in the policy hot seat, so I appreciate this. So a lot of your discussion points were using future tense. This will happen, this is going to happen, things like that. And I hear that a lot in policy circles. And then, of course, where it seems to be beneficial, people switch to present tense or, it happened or it's happening, and I feel like it's at the operator community, at the operations level, we already see it regularly, and it's happening, and it happened. Communities have already been impacted, operators have already been impacted. Yet at the policy level, it still seems like there's unsure of what language to use and where we actually are in terms of impact. So my question is, what is it going to take to move language from it's going to happen to it happened or it's happening, and to make the policy community recognize that this is already a future that exists? It's not a future that is optional anymore.
Yeah, this is that's a good framing and a good question. So I think it's both a future. It's only going to get worse. So I think being able to articulate that things are just going to become more impactful, and we're going to continue to see greater opportunities for adversary impact with their infrastructure, or adversaries that are going to move from pre-positioning to action within that area, and being able to articulate that the future is so much worse if we don't do something now, and recognizing that it has already happened and it is happening today. It's just like, the alerts that we shared, with the community on things like, PLC targeting, with the Iranians, in recent history. That was real targeting that we were seeing within the space, largely, internet accessible devices, some of them, did not have the right level of, security configuration that we would have hoped within the space. And we saw a tremendous amount of success there, at least in generating additional awareness amongst operators and getting some of those things off of the accessible edge and getting them away from being internet accessible for the adversary, where they're trying to take advantage of that low-hanging fruit potentially. So I think there's a recognition that this is happening today. It has happened in the past. I mean, I don't think that's any dispute whatsoever, and I know I wouldn't be challenged in this room for sure. But it's also about framing of how do we need to be able to make smart investments for the future, with the understanding that the impact and consequence that we've seen will go from a more localized, we have incidents and examples of where this has been felt or where we've gotten lucky in the past, to being something that is going to be much more widespread and much more impactful and consequential for, I think, our broader civilization, and not just localized instances of things that as they've occurred.
So is there like a number or size or scope that it's going to take to reach that threshold?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, as we pivot, raise your hand if there's one more burning question. You're still willing to take one more. I want to thank CISA. I do think your point is fantastic, which is the language and the storytelling we're using are undermining us. I actually think our enemies are using this mind the gap space in our policy to their advantage. They're maximizing this gray space. But to thank CISA, one of the most useful, incredible alerts you put out was the one about PLCs being compromised routinely by the Iranian hacking groups. Because I think we are so conditioned in the press, that's why the press panel is so important later today. We're so conditioned to wait for a breach count, a dollar count, a damage estimate. And it is already outrageous that what they're doing with those PLCs, whether they always make the public alerts, is they're shutting off ladder logic and alarms such that when something bad happens later, you won't see it to do the manual intervention. So it is a form of aggression, just like our video, that maybe they're coming in and out of your house. They just haven't stolen anything yet. This particular gray space is why we're in such danger. And CISA has been one of the only agencies that is putting out that information that allows us to have more substantive and nuanced conversations with water facilities. So thank you for that. Do you want one more question, or I don't know your schedule?
Yeah,
so.
I'm staying here until you kick me out.
Okay, so I'm over there. I'm going to run.
Hey, thank you. James Hess with Unknown Cyber. I was wondering how we can help from advocacy level at the state. I've run into some significant issues in Louisiana with the water system that runs the capital's water in Louisiana. And we tried to give them a solution for free, and they don't even have the people necessary in order to just execute the solution at the local level. So what do our state senators need to hear from those stakeholders to get action and assist you with your message? Thank you.
Yeah, I think some of it's a mechanical issue. I mean, so every state and locality is slightly different. You know, some of our states, I guess depending on your perspective, enjoy having a legislature that is in session year round. Some of them have periodic ones. You know, Virginia, they've got like a short session year followed by a long session year, and some of our states out there have session every other year. So I think there's a real gap in opportunity to be able to engage with some of those legislators and be able to have conversations about even some of the procurement methodologies or the procurement law restrictions that some of our state and local counterparts find themselves operating within. You know, where they can't necessarily even say, even if you were being a fantastic Samaritan and said, here you go, I've got this solution, hardware, software, whatever it is, training resources. I'd love for you to be able to accept the gift of this to be able to help, because I live here in this community too, and I want to be able to see it, you know, have an increased level of resilience. There are a lot of states and localities where they can't do that. They can't even accept it. You showed up on my doorstep, I couldn't accept something free as a federal entity. I'd have to come up with a contract mechanism and say, here we go, here's a pilot process, here's a proof of concept, here's however we're going to be able to do that. That conversation, again, moving from the theoretical and the cyber focused risk conversation and more to that guilty knowledge conversation of being able to say, you know, representative, delegates, you know, senator, whatever they are in that area, this is the consequence that we're having. People don't typically have, you know, like living somewhere like, you know, Louisiana, or I'm from South Carolina. People don't have qualms about investing in things like physical resilience against things like hurricanes. Or if you live in certain states that are wildfire prone, about wildfire resilience, you know, about digging lines, clearing brush, you know, practicing for public safety shutoffs, you know, with power line, whatever. Being able to reframe that conversation around consequence and what this is going to mean for people, and about, again, both the psychological impact and the health and safety impact of a lack of availability of critical infrastructure without being hyperbolic, I think is important. Because, you know, these legislators, I mean, they're just, especially in the state and local side, you know, whether it's a local councilman or a, you know, county commissioner or whatever it might, these are folks that are working as real estate agents, as firefighters, as teachers, as, you know, just members of our community. And this is not their day. They do not necessarily, with all the issues that are before them, have necessarily the capacity to be able to have a deep technical understanding like we do. And we have to find a way to not be Chicken Little, but all at the same time, be able to get the point across to them about the potential impact and the reason why it's investment ready. We have to be able to make the point to them that our digital infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that's affecting our critical infrastructure delivery right now in many parts of this country is the equivalent of crumbling roads and bridges. And we have to be able to make investments in an appropriate way to be able to secure the water sector, to be able to secure energy, to be able to secure transportation and so forth and so on down the line. We're absolutely a resource to be able to help with that. You know, every time I go out on the road, I'm meeting with state and local counterparts, or, you know, seeing them as they're coming in, and being able to have the opportunity to further collaborate and be able to talk about where our grant dollars can best go. But it really is a unified effort where I think we have to be joint and deliberate and persistent in our messaging, again, to focus on consequence, because having the technical conversation is just not going to be one that is compelling for a non-technical audience, and it's very hard to sort of quantify and understand that.
Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause to Nick.